Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Driving Revenue, the New Field Service Imperative, sponsored by ServiceMax and brought to you by Field Service. As you know, we have a great speaker lined up for today. Joining us from the north of England near Manchester is the Vice President of Global Customer Transformation at ServiceMax, Dave Hart. Dave has an extensive background in the field service arena where he works with prospects and existing customers to unlock and understand the value of their field service organizations. Right before jumping into the presentation, a couple things to keep in mind. We'll be leaving about 20 minutes toward the end of the webinar for a live Q&A session. This is your opportunity to prepare any questions you have for Dave, which you can then submit through the questions box feature on your screen at that time. Please also look out for 2 live polling questions that will come up during the presentation. I'll give you the heads up, you can answer, and then we'll release the results on air. Our goal is to make this webinar as engaging as possible. So if you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to submit them through the questions box feature at any time. All right, take it away, Dave.
Thank you. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to this webinar. So the webinar is entitled Revenue, the New Imperative for Field Service. But we'll question that as we go through the presentation. And I often say when you come on webinars like this, how long is this thing going to last? And I attend a lot of webinars as part and parcel of my role. So I hope to keep the webinar to about 30 minutes today. Hope we keep you highly engaged. But before we start, a lot of people wonder, well, who is this guy that's speaking on the phone and kind of what gives him the authority or the right, as it were, to talk to us about something like field service revenue? So I thought I'd just start by giving you a little bit of a background on who I am. So I started, believe it or not, in 1983 as a field service engineer working on photocopiers and printers. And I really enjoyed my time as a field service engineer, but then decided that I wanted to kind of progress and move into the management space. So I started running a team of very small engineers, only about 9 in the team originally, and then ran a team of sort of 30 guys. And then eventually I opened the service branch for the company I worked for at the time in the Republic of Ireland. And then I moved companies and lastly joined the Pitney Bowes organization, where I ran the UK service organization, then a European team, and then I became vice president of European service for Pitney Bowes across the whole of Europe. And for the purposes of being open and honest on this webinar, I was actually a ServiceMax customer. So we implemented ServiceMax to over 1,000 field service engineers across the whole of Europe. And hopefully as I go through this presentation, you'll see some of the experiences that I gained through that process. So that's a little bit about me. So what about you? Where does your business sit? Now, if you're looking at the screen right now and you feel that as a service leader you sit to maybe to the left-hand side of this screen, where perhaps you're running a cost center, and that's fine. There are some situations where cost centers make perfect sense in a field service organization, such as perhaps working for a government agency, for instance. But you might find that your budget is your budget and you don't get a dime more no matter what happens within your business. And of course, if revenue declines, then you may find your budget's getting squeezed. But you could be sitting on the right-hand side of this slide, where you are technically the custodian of revenue within your service business. You know, as you see growth in your service organization, maybe you can start to invest so you can drive more growth or more efficiencies within your business. And perhaps your organizations have realized that it can't cut its way to success by constantly looking for operational efficiencies. And maybe you're driven to constantly innovate. And if that's the case, then hopefully we've structured this particular webinar for you. So let's just take a reality check before we talk about service revenue, and let's think about what's happening within field service organizations. Well, first of all, we need to kind of size what field service looks like. We know from the Department of Labor statistics that in the year 2020, there will be 6.6 million salespeople in the US. And a lot of people ask me, well, how many field service engineers are there? Well, at the last count in 2012, there were 5.4 million service engineers in the US alone. And we believe that will grow by the year 2020 to nearly as many salespeople as there are in the US. And if you take that number globally, we believe that number to be nearly 20 million field service engineers. So as more and more organizations look at, moving their sales organizations to perhaps the telephone and the web, these field service engineers really are the eyes, ears, and face of your brand. And as the service economy continues to grow, we see more and more field service organizations popping up. So let's look at why service now makes sense to CEOs And as part and parcel of my role, I have more contact with COOs, CFOs, and CEOs in organizations, both large and small. And they're taking a vested interest in their field service business. And the reason they're doing that is that, best-in-class field service organizations can drive 35% plus service margins. And when that's compared to product margins, service margins are now up to 11% higher than equipment margins. And, during the big recession that we've been through, we're seeing that equipment margins are declining, equipment sales are declining, and therefore CEOs are taking a good hard look at their field service organizations, licking their lips almost, looking at those numbers like 35% margins and saying, how do I drive my field service organization to deliver those kind of returns? When you look at what's happened to field service over the years, technically, a lot of organizations sat at the bottom of this kind of maturity curve, if you like, where they were offering ad hoc service support, or maybe there was some simple equipment maintenance contracts. But the organizations that are smart are the organizations that are moving up and to the right, getting into consultant services, pay-per-use, maybe even performance-based business logic, and ultimately risk and reward contracts that we're seeing more and more. If you like, some people call it servitization or outcome-based servicing. Now, there's a huge investment required in the service business, that's for sure. But with that comes the kind of trusted advisor status, if you like, the more importance to your organization in terms of total revenue. And I would argue if you're at the bottom left-hand side of this graph, then life's becoming very tough for you. The margins are being driven down, customers are demanding more and more operational efficiencies from you. And those companies that are moving up and to the right are the ones that recognize that by partnering with organizations, by having some of this performance-based business logic, they can really drive true value into their service business and, of course, value for the customer. So what's changing in our world of service? Well, I'm afraid we're not selling products anymore. We're selling solutions. It's not about outputs. It's about outcomes for the customer. This is not a transactional relationship anymore. This is a true business relationship. And it's not about having a bunch of suppliers, it's about having a bunch of partners. And no longer are we managing elements, but managing ecosystems, where to deliver great service to the customer, we may have to deal with multiple suppliers within our realm to make sure what we deliver to the customer is exactly what they're looking for. So the world of service is changing quite extensively. And then if you look at this information from the Aberdeen Group, this was taken in December 2014. When asked the question, what are the top challenges that are affecting service business? If you look at 2014 versus 2013, organizations are saying that competitions in product and service are increasing dramatically. And of course, they're also reporting they're seeing reduced service margins, which brings me back to the previous slide. Maybe those people are in that bottom left-hand corner of that maturity matrix. Customers are not spending any less, but there is increased product complexity coming into the field service organization. So there's a lot of challenges that organizations are facing right now. And then let's look at the evolution of field service. Let's think about the 60s and the field service engineer. Gone are the days where these guys were in the field, they were all alone, nobody knew where they really were until they called the office. Those times are changing with the advent of cell phones to engineers, maybe laptops, PDAs, and now ultimately smart devices such as, things like Google Glass, engineers going around with iPads or phablets or whatever. We've really got an empowered service organization now once we give tools to the field service engineer to be out there. And as I say, they really are the eyes and ears and face of your brand moving forward. So you may argue as a field service leader that you're trying to hire a six-armed field service engineer, somebody that needs to take work orders, can perhaps take payments from the customers. Maybe you schedule or they schedule themselves. The fact that they can check into forward stocking locations, upsell, cross-sell, handling multiple currencies. And by the way, not just men, we're attracting more and more women into field service. And of course, as field service leaders, we've got that dilemma to think of as well. And how do we handle that? So what are we looking at as far as tomorrow's problems are concerned? Well, there's another dilemma that I think is hitting field service leaders. For the first time, certainly in our human history, it's taken 13 years to grow from 6 billion to 7 billion people on this planet. And that's the first time in our history where the population growth is slowing. And therefore, as more and more of our experienced field service engineers are leaving our business, we have less to choose from in the marketplace, and therefore our businesses, our service businesses, really need to think about how they're going to attract talent moving forward. And of course, when we talk to field service leaders, and again ask them the question, what are the internal challenges that you're facing within your service organizations? We're starting to see things appear that weren't even on the radar a few years ago. Things like workforce turnover. I was talking to a high-tech service company a couple of weeks ago where their workforce turnover from a field service perspective is 25%. Just imagine that. 1 in 4 of your field service engineers is leaving their business every single year, and that's a real headache for them. And of course, coupled with that, you've got the aging workforce. The fact that all of that fantastic tribal knowledge that's been gathered over many years is now walking out of your building. And of course, all field service leaders report back the same internal challenges. The executive mandate to increase efficiency, of course, and of course, cutting costs is high up there. But these other dynamics are starting to now appear in field service organizations. And of course, we then go meet our CEO, who asks us for more and more each year. Drive that extra productivity. Give me those efficiencies. Reduce your costs by 5%. Give me higher net promoter score. And of course, now they're asking the other question, you need to drive more revenue into my field service organization. So is this you, the service leader, perhaps awake at night with some of these things on your mind? The fact that you really don't know where your install base is, so it's very hard to drive additional revenue. Are you delivering inconsistent service? Are you getting feedback from your customers where they're unhappy with a low net promoter score? Do you have long invoice times where your order to cash cycles are just far too long in your organization? And of course, are you managing that aging workforce, watching people walk out the door with all of that knowledge, and how do you replace that? And of course, the added dilemma for field service managers now who are lying there in bed at nights, of course, is how do I grow my revenue? So let's think about it. You'd almost think that you guys now in field service have to be heroes. As Americans put it, you need to walk and chew gum because you have to increase customer satisfaction, manage those efficiencies that are being demanded for from your business. You have the issue of the aging workforce and hiring of millennials that are joining your company and how you devise strategies for them. And of course, the walk and chew gum bit, meaning you have to grow revenue at the same time. So I just want you to stop for a moment and just imagine for 1 second that all of that is possible and it can be done. And let's try and talk through some of the reasons why we can do that. Because Aberdeen did a survey in May of 2015 of this year and reported back that 81% of leading service organizations actually achieved their service growth in 2014. So that should give us all a little bit of hope that it is possible, and the vast majorities of organizations in that leading category are driving the changes in their business and improving their revenue and making their revenue goals for the year. So for me, there is no better time. The time is right now for us all as field service leaders to act, because now more than ever, the tools and the technologies are now available in the marketplace to help you succeed as field service leaders, to manage all of those dynamics that I just talked to you about, and obviously improve revenue. So you can have a confident, engaged, and productive field service team. It's not beyond the realms of possibility. You can have seamless and efficient call closing and invoicing. Those things are available right now in the tools that are available. And of course, those loyal and satisfied customers that we all need to keep hold of. Of course, retaining our existing customers is pivotal, particularly for the annuity streams that they deliver to our organizations. And of course, more and more I'm seeing that field service leaders are having conversations with the C-suite, and they are now getting support for the services organization to allow the service organization to invest and, of course, to grow from a top-line perspective. So let's go back to what we originally started this webinar about. Now we've had some of the background and history. Let's talk about revenue itself. So what kind of things can you do? And I just want to share some experiences here with you, some case studies that we have, and obviously my own experience in going out there and talking to customers, but also what I particularly went through in my own journey as a field service leader. So if you want to be that hero in your organization, particularly when it comes to revenue, there are three things that I think we need to concentrate. The first one is to stop the leaks in your organization. The second is to really harness the power of your greatest asset in your company. And then the third thing is to realize that everybody in your organization is a salesperson. So let's go through those one by one. First of all, how do we stop the leaks in our organization? You know, I love this picture because we took this from one of our customers as we first started to talk to them about how we could help. And believe it or not, this is their contracts room. And all of the information on their customers is stored in this particular room here. Things like the customer's entitlement, their warranty periods, the length of duration of their contract, and so on. And this is great. Unfortunately, it's all in the wrong place because it's not in the hands of the people who really need it. It's sat in a back office in a big room somewhere where it's extremely difficult to go and get the information that you want. And as I said, the tools and technology are now available so we can short-circuit having these kind of problems within our organization. How can we do that? Well, when you look into organizations about, having pre-revenue conversations with your customers. So when the customer calls you through on the telephone, do your service agents have access to real-time customer information? And you can see in both leaders and following organizations, yes, all of them do, which is terrific. They have that information at the point where the customer calls in and wants to talk to them about what they're entitled to. Then, of course, it moves to the dispatch team, where the dispatchers may have conversations with the customers, talking them through, when the field service engineer will arrive. And unfortunately, that number starts to drop a little bit, where only 79% of organizations have that information about the customer entitlement at their fingertips. But I guess what's really worrying is, of course, when it gets to the field service engineer, where the rubber meets the road, as we say. You can see here, less than sort of 50% of organizations are saying that their service engineers can review warranty and the customer entitlements on each job. And for me, that's a huge gap in organizations. So what can it look like? Well, here's an example of a ServiceMax screen. This is on iPad, but of course it's available on things like iPhone, Android devices, and of course mobile for laptop. But let's just use iPad for now. When a service engineer is in doubt, they need to be able to get the information at their fingertips, not stuck in a big room somewhere back in head office, but actually where the engineer is facing the customer themselves. So all the engineer has to do is click on the entitlement tab, and then it will tell him all of the information. When's the warranty valid on this particular machine? When is the contract valid? And then, of course, what is the service contract number? And then underneath that, you can see things like labor, travel, and parts, in this particular case, all covered. It takes all the ambiguity out from the service engineer. It stops them having awkward conversations with the customer when they're in doubt, because they have all of the information at their fingertips, empowered by ServiceMax. And what I would implore is the more service leaders I talk to, the more I hear the same stories. All the information goes into our system, it's just that we can't get the information out. A lot of service leaders are what I call managing via the rear view mirror. Instead of looking through the front windshield to see what's coming, they're always looking back to see what's just happened. So don't guess the performance of your field service organization. Many organizations have what I call Excel jockeys. They have these huge macros that they write in Excel. They concatenate Excel spreadsheets from multiple parts of the organization, sales information coming in, information from finance, costs coming in from supply chain, marketing. All of that information is just brought into these huge sets of spreadsheets where, as field service leaders, you have to try and decipher what is going on in your field service organization. So I think there's a way around that. We don't have to guess performance anymore. Because as I said to you before, if a field service engineer does decide to override the system, and in this case, not bill the customer for something, and that could well happen in a field service organization, such as a chargeable call where perhaps we didn't fix the product on the first visit and we need to go back again. As you can see here, the engineer is forcing a non-billing activity. But previously in a lot of organizations, this is what we call by revenue leakage. This is where some of these free of charge work done by field service engineers goes unchecked in your organization. But of course, if you have live dashboards, if you get reporting, you can perhaps have a manager emailed when an engineer makes a call free of charge. You want to see things like your install product. You want to know what you've been able to build, not just last month, but what did we build today? What are we going to build tomorrow? What contracts are due for renewal? All of that information is very, very useful to a field service leader because, of course, once you have that data, you can then act on that data and make sure you drive your revenue in your organization. Don't guess performance when performance can be brought to your desktop minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, month by month. And you can cut, slice, and dice the information in any way, shape, or form. That's not a pipe dream. Those tools exist today. The second thing I wanted to do was talk about harnessing the revenue opportunities from what I call your greatest assets. You know, the Aberdeen Group survey that was done in May 2015 asked the question of leading organizations, do you have incentives for your sales force to cross-sell and upsell warranties and service contracts? And only 52% of organizations said they did, which I think is a huge opportunity if you're one of those organizations that don't incent your sales force. I know from previous experience that I've seen organizations that significantly impact the ability for a salesperson to earn commission if they don't sell a service contract at the point of sale. And of course, as we all know, those annuity streams are the lifeblood of a service organization. So if you can get that service contract at the point of sale, then you've almost guaranteed yourself 3 or maybe 5 years revenue into your service organization. And of course, the second question is, do you give compensation for incentives for your service engineers to cross-sell and upsell or put sales lead into the system? And again, only a third of companies are actually doing that right now, which again is a huge opportunity. You know, I apologize for this slide if there are any salespeople on the call. But you know, many years ago, I went out with a field service engineer, and the customer approached the service engineer and suggested that they needed his advice. And the customer had had a salesman visit them who said they needed to upgrade the machine. And the customer approached the service engineer and said, hey, do you think I need a new machine? And I realized at that point that service engineers really have so much power in their fingertips. That deal would have been won and lost on the next sentence that came out of the engineer's mouth. And I said to the customer, I'm really intrigued why you felt the need to ask the field service engineer whether you should buy a new machine or not. And that was the quote that came back with, salespeople tell lies, and my service engineer always tells me the truth. And that is the kind of power that these people wield. And I think if you can harness that, you have a great opportunity. You know, one of our people within ServiceMax went on a ride-along. Every year, everybody in ServiceMax has to go on a ride-along and go visit the field service engineer and just see what these people are putting up with every single day. This is an engineer that's actually closing the call, but at the same time, the customer asked him about some information about a new product they were selling. And the engineer was desperate to write it down before he forgot what the customer was saying in the information they were giving. Now, of course, you could argue this method is great because it works both portrait and landscape, of course, but I would argue you've just got to hope that the engineer doesn't wash his hands before he gets home and, of course, forgets all the information. But there is a better way, because why not drive that into the tools that are available for engineers? You know, again, we see a picture of an iPad screen here where the engineer clicks on the sales and marketing tab, puts a note to say he has a sales lead, and then he puts all the information into his iPad. And I think we all know that service engineers can glean an awful lot of information from the customer in terms of their buying habits and make sure that we have a fully qualified sales lead that goes into our system. And you don't necessarily need to integrate this into something like Salesforce. I mean, even if you export this report into Excel, at least you've captured the information. You can give the engineer feedback on what's happening with that particular opportunity. And of course, while the engineer's out there in the marketplace, of course, he sees an awful lot of things going on. What's happening with competitor products? Is there a competitor product by the side of your product, and what's happening with it? And of course, if you can capture that information as well, then you really are tapping into a huge potential in your organization. You know, if you think about it, a lot of companies these days have far more field service engineers than they do have salespeople. And sometimes the only touch point that the customer has is through their field service engineers. So empower them. Give them the ability to capture this kind of information, and you can really drive some top-line revenue growth within your organization. And of course, now we have the ability with a tool we call Smart Docs, we have the ability now for engineers to call up all kinds of forms. So things like a pro forma invoice, the ability to call up an extended warranty contract, or maybe even a full service contract, and the ability for the engineer to have the conversation with the customer. And if the customer wants to sign there and then, we have the ability to capture customer signatures, and of course the ability for you to capture more revenue. So I'm not here suggesting that field service engineers become salespeople, not by any stretch of the imagination. What I am saying though is if you give them the tools, they can really look for revenue opportunities, and if necessary, capture those revenue opportunities for you. The third thing I'd like to touch on is the fact that it may be an old cliche, but that everybody in their organization is a salesperson. Remember, we came back to that slide. Remember, in leading organizations, best-in-class organizations, the equipment margins are 11% lower than field service margins. So let's make everybody a salesperson. I guess the question is, do we do that? And we will poll you in a second. So what this information telling us from Aberdeen Group is when customers were asked the question, having a dedicated sales force, will that drive increased service contract rates? Virtually everybody is saying, nearly 90% of the team there, you can see, are saying that having a dedicated sales force will have a great impact or some impact on service contract rates. If you put incentives in for your salespeople, then over 90% of the people polled in this are saying, yes, if you put sales incentives in place, then you will have a great impact or some impact. And then, of course, do you give your engineers the ability to look into the contract status? Of course, if the engineers know what the contract status is, then they have the ability to have that empowered conversation with the customer. You're coming out of the warranty period. Would you like to think about taking a service contract? And then finally, the executive visibility. So I think at this point, we're just going to ask you a couple of poll questions.
Hello there. We're going to get you ready. If you just give me 1 second, I'm about to launch a poll question. So as you can see on your screen, the question is, do you have a dedicated sales force that is actively selling your service and warranty solutions? If you would just take a second to reply. We're going to give it just 5 more seconds. All right. So it looks like 71% of you said yes, and 29% said no, and nobody said I don't know. So that looks great. Now just hang tight. We have one more to share with you. Here we go. Do you give your sales force incentives to sign service contracts at the point of sale? Please respond yes, no, or I don't know. We're going to give you about 5 more seconds before we close the poll. Alrighty, we're going to close and I'm going to share those results with you right now. It looks like 32% said yes, 58% said no, and 11% said I don't know. Just give us 1 second and Dave will be right back on the line.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate your feedback on that. It's really interesting data, so we'll definitely take that on board. So thank you for that. So I mentioned before about the heroes, and I want to talk to you about a hero, a guy called Ian Hubbard. Ian used to be a colleague of mine in Pitney Bowes. And, you know, what have Pitney Bowes done since implementing ServiceMax? Well, yes, by giving their engineers the information, such as all of the customer information on their iPads, they've had the ability for their engineers to call ahead and, you know, stop a truck roll because they have local information on what's happening with the customer. That non-billing approval, that leakage that I was talking about before, because Pitney now have a system of every time an engineer makes a billable charge non-billable, the manager gets an email about it, it sits on the reporting line and the manager can question. They've saved over $500,000, this is in 2014, by having the controls, the checks and balances on those forced non-billing approvals. They reduced inventory by 5 million, improved the ability to send carcass or spare parts back to be repaired and returned. But I think most importantly, generated over $7 million in additional sales leads, if you will, service lead creation by utilizing ServiceMax. These are not my numbers. These are numbers published by Pitney Bowes. They actually did a presentation for us last year at Dreamforce. So these are real life. These are ways of really driving additional revenue, stopping your costs by call avoid, but of course forcing those non-billing approvals through a management system and of course generating additional service leads, therefore transferring those into sales leads and new business. And remember, every new sales lead that comes through pretty much guarantees you a new service contract, so it keeps that annuity stream going in your organization. But Ian's not alone. There are people like Gary Santos at Topcon who do ophthalmic equipment, Steve Narv in Linux in the medical device space, and also people like Nick Collins. These are all what we consider as our field service heroes because they're growing top-line revenue and improving efficiencies in their organization. What I'd like to do now is just concentrate on another one of our heroes, Nick Collins from Coca-Cola Enterprises. So let me ask you a question. If I was to give you another 74 additionally trained and vetted service technicians, no recruiting costs at all, no onboarding, no ramp-up time, no training courses, just 74 guys that could hit the ground running tomorrow, the question is, would you take them? And I think most of us on the call would say, hey, what's the catch? Yes, of course we would. Because if you think about it, if you can increase that headroom in your field service organization and then go scout for new opportunities, then you really can drive additional revenue streams into your organization. The question is that a lucky dip? Not at all. The question is, would you do it? I would imagine you would. And Nick Collins is one of those guys that took that and delivered some outstanding results for Coca-Cola. So Coca-Cola Enterprises is the marketer, distributor, and producer of Coca-Cola products in Europe. And you can see there by the numbers, 17 manufacturing sites, only 12,000 employees. This is a big organization. But coupled with that, they have two strategic goals in their organization. The very first thing is to continue to repair effectively their own Coca-Cola equipment. And that's the vending machines that you see, that's the refrigerated units in your local shops, department stores, and so on. But they also want to expand into paid service on non-Coca-Cola equipment. And they had a great infrastructure, over 600 technicians, spare parts and logistics, 5 call centers operating in different languages in Europe. This is a great organization with a terrific brand. When they looked at their field service organization, obviously they did what most people did. They looked at 2 areas of where their technicians are engaged. The first thing is what's happening during their normal working day. That's the number of calls they do and, of course, their travel time. But they found that they had this big chunk called administration, and they really didn't understand why their engineers were spending so much of the time doing administration work. And of course, what they realized very quickly is they were using antiquated systems. Their engineers had a laptop, and more often than not, it was locked in a case in their trucks. They had to connect into a VPN system, and of course, over 3G, that can be really difficult, and they kept being cancelled and locked out and so on. And of course, we all know that sometimes a laptop, by the time you've got it booted up and so on, can be very frustrating. So their engineers were writing things down on bits of paper, getting home in the evening, or sitting in their van where they had a good signal, connecting and downloading all of the jobs that they'd done that particular day. And of course, that was leading to a lot of frustration in the workforce and a lot of dissatisfied customers. So we connected them to ServiceMax. They chose iPhone as their device of choice. We connected it to their back office systems, the Salesforce.com for their salespeople, and also SAP, which is their ERP system. And as I said, when we gave them that portable, always-on device, there's no boot-up time, no connection time. We have those live links and those APIs into those systems. So what happened once they implemented ServiceMax? Well, they found they had that 50% reduction in administration savings by implementing alone. So some of you may be skeptical out there and saying, okay, that's interesting, but how does that really affect revenue, and what's that got to do with revenue? Well, what Coca-Cola found themselves is that they managed to get 1 extra visit per day from their service engineers just by reducing that administration time. And of course, if you do 630 engineers by 1 job a day, then they've created capacity of 630 jobs. And if you multiply 630 jobs a day by 250 working days, they've created 157,500 potential more visits. That's where the 74 extra engineers come from. So by implementing technology, they created themselves some significant amount of slack within their field service organization. And they wanted to do that on purpose because their whole strategy was, how do we expand into our existing customer base? And of course, when you're repairing Coca-Cola equipment in places like Burger King or McDonald's or a Subway store, then of course you're walking past a plethora of other products that you could potentially service. And now they're into some of these organizations, doing deals with Starbucks and the KFCs of this world, repairing equipment in IKEA stores and so on. What does that really mean net? Well, since implementing ServiceMax, we've had a 275% increase in field service revenues since they implemented. And that, for me, is true hero status. This is an organization that embraced technology, got the benefits that they were looking for, and then drove top-line growth in their organization. And that's what this webinar is all about. So Nick Collins is very much a hero. That 50% reduction in admin, leading to that capacity, driving increased revenue, is exactly what we're talking about. So how else can we help you in ServiceMax? Well, there's a couple of extra tools that I think you need to know about. The first one is our business value realization tool. This is where we take a lot of operational and company data from you, and then take information from ServiceMax and what the ServiceMax functionality is and how it can help you in your business. And then we can start calculating business value realization, not necessarily ROI, but more than that. We'll give you things like the top 5 areas we think we can impact, how we can help you drive revenue and how the tool will help you drive revenue, how it will improve your operational effectiveness. And then, of course, we'll talk to you about some of the softer benefits, how we can help things like customer satisfaction, employee engagement, maybe the green agenda by less truck rolls and so on. So that tool is a fantastic way of getting into your business and really understanding how you can drive value from your field service organization. And the second tool is what we call our maturity matrix, where we'll look and measure your organization versus your peer group. How are you really performing on areas like cost control, your mobility strategy? What are your attach rates like compared to your peer group or against the industry? What's your technician utilization rates, and so on? And we'll collect all of that data and then be able to give you the information back about how you perform against your peer group. And again, it may help you drive what you need in your business to raise awareness of your field service organization along with the business value realization tool, and help you potentially drive a business case to go and get a service system of your choice that helps you drive the revenue gains that you need in your organization. So the question I leave you with is this really a case of being a hero? I'm not so sure. I think the tools are out there to help you generate those revenues that we've talked about. And ultimately, if you do decide to go on this journey, you potentially could be the hero in your organization. And thank you so much for listening to the webinar. And we're now going to open it up for questions. Thank you.
Great. Well, I hope everybody can hear me. Thank you so much for that engaging presentation, Dave. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. I'm going to open the floor now to questions. So if you would go to your question box and submit any questions you have, I'm going to give it a couple seconds before I start answering them. All right, great. We have a couple questions here. The first one that I have for you, Dave, is I struggle with the concept getting my engineers to sell. I don't want to have my engineers break the bond of trust with their customers. In your experience, have you seen companies who have managed this successfully?
Yeah, great question. And it is a dilemma. And I must admit, whenever I deliver this presentation, I usually have 3 or 4 service leaders who rush up to the lectern when I finished, grab hold of me and say, hey, you're saying these guys are trusted advisors, but if we make them sell, then aren't we going to break that trust? And I think it's a very fine line. I saw a presentation from a guy called Jim Baston, who actually runs service workshops to try and help field service engineers bridge that gap. I think there's a fine line between selling and serving the customer. And of course, because engineers have that trusted advisor status, then customers do turn to them for help and advice. And I think it's important that engineers recognize that in that case, the customer wants to be served and is looking for their advice. So I'm not advocating that any field service organization should give targets to their field service engineers in terms of a selling target. I think that would be a disastrous thing to do. What I am saying is that I think if you empower your field service engineers, if you give them the tools to make it easy for them to serve the customer, then they will recognize that they have a huge impact to play in your organization as well. Have I seen a company do this well? I've seen one or two do it pretty good. I don't think anybody's really got it spot on yet, and I think a lot of people are still trying. And I think the most important thing to recognize in this is you probably split your engineers up into 3 different levels. You have a third of your engineers that will embrace it because they see they're serving the customer. You probably have a third of them that will be a little bit skeptical, but you may well change their mind and talk to them about serving rather than selling. And then you're probably going to have a third of the engineers who probably, frankly, don't think it's their job anymore. And that's okay. You know, I wouldn't force any organization into a behavior for 100% of their staff. But even if you get 2/3 of your field service organization to switch onto this, just imagine what the opportunities would be. So I hope that clarifies.
Great answer, Dave. Let's see, we have another question here. I understand the need for service business to drive more revenue, but how can I get senior management in particular to understand the value of seeing service as a revenue engine?
Yeah, you know, I mentioned before that some CEOs are walking into their service leader's office demanding improved performance. Maybe you're not in that position right now where that's happening to you. So I think I mentioned before, things like the business value realization tool, I think it would help you build a business case about what you want to do for your field service organization. And that information isn't just, you know, kind of a wow factor with what ServiceMax can do. We've taken a lot of industry data, you know, from people like the TSAA, you know, Gartner, Aberdeen Group, and so on, where we've seen what best-in-class versus, you know, average versus laggard companies are doing. And we can effectively model out where you believe your organization is and where you want to take your field service organization. So we'll put the decision into your hands and your organization to say, what do you think you can achieve and what do you think is achievable? And then once we've given you those tools, I think that will lead you to build, you know, a great business case. And then I think, you know, doing your research, you know, if you go out there and start researching and going to some of these analysts, you can clearly see that smart organizations are thinking about outcome-based servicing. You know, I often say to people in the, you know, 45 minutes or whatever we've been on this call, the chances are one of your competitors is in a room now plotting your downfall, plotting how they can beat you in the marketplace. And I think unless you spend some of your time and your C-suite spend some of their time going from, you know, reacting to what's happening into the business to talking about how you can future-proof your business, how you can delight your customers, how you can improve your employee engagement, and how you can drive additional revenue, then I think your competitors are definitely doing that. So I think that's the way I would start this thing, and obviously ServiceMax would be delighted to help you. I mean, just, you know, log on to our website. You can see the tools and see what's available, and just contact us through our website, and we'll be happy to chip in and help you out.
Great. Well, unfortunately, we have approached that 2 p.m. mark. Any questions that we didn't get to, absolutely stay in touch with us. We'll be in touch with you post the webinar. If you have any questions that you would like us or Dave to address, you can feel free to send them to webinar@wbresearch.com when we can address them there. Just one thing to mention, please take a second before we close the webinar to give us your feedback on the presentation in a quick survey. I promise it'll take you maybe 5 seconds. It's really your suggestions that help keep these so successful. And also feel free to share any comments or relevant topics that you want to hear about. This presentation will soon be hosted on the Field Service website, and you will all receive information to view the replay through email. Again, thank you so much for attending and today for conducting such an engaging presentation. From ServiceMax and all of us here at Field Service, thank you all once again for joining and have a great day.